Dr. King warned his brothers and sisters that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a time of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. If you listen to Dr. King's speech today and replace the words Vietnam with the words war on terrorism, it would be as if he was standing before us today and telling us it is time to see the writing on the wall. When you understand the problems with the current corporate media's narrative on 9/11, you begin to understand why Muslim lives matter. In fact, why all lives matter. The importance of the events of 9/11 to U.S. history cannot be denied. Everyone agrees that this event changed the course of our history, but the public will never understand the events of 9/11 without a basic history lesson about the events of that historic day. Now, in Arabic-speaking countries, an Al-Qaeda is literally a small toilet. So what do you think the chances are that an international terrorist organization created to bring jihad against the entire world would name itself after a common household item used to toilet train children in the Arab world? To understand how to diffuse the international tension surrounding these issues, we must first recognize how we ended up where we are. What other policies did we previously institute that may have been mistakes? Understanding those policy failures, we then can proceed to seek solutions with all the facts on the table. In the early 1980s, William Casey, CIA director under Ronald Reagan, began to fund the Mujahideen rebels in their war against the Soviet invaders. The key player in this organization became Osama bin Laden, known in FBI documents as Tim Osmond, who traveled to the U.S. to look at different weapons options for the Mujahideen that they might be able to purchase. The United States taxpayers eventually supplied more than $25 billion in support of this project. Why is this important, might you ask? Because the United States government, acting through the CIA and ISI Pakistani intelligence, started and funded Al-Qaeda from its first day of existence. On July 10th, 2005, British Foreign Secretary in the United Kingdom confirmed that Al-Qaeda literally meant the database and was originally the computer file of thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with the help from the Central Intelligence Agency to defeat the Russians. The database was maintained by bin Laden's Maktab al-Kishmat recruiting organization, which had its headquarters in Beit Answar guest house in Panjwar, Pakistan, and maintained offices in Detroit and Brooklyn in the 80s. From the beginning, Al-Qaeda was a database created by the intelligence community that was used to track the activities of 100,000 Muslim fighters that Vice President Bush and Central Intelligence Agency Director William Casey organized to fight a jihad against Russia in Afghanistan. When we begin to examine the criminality of the torture issue, the idea that Al-Qaeda was a database becomes very important because it speaks to who in the database was tortured and raises questions about whether the torture program was more about eliminating witnesses who had participated in a variety of covert activity under U.S. sponsorship instead of seeking information, since the Central Intelligence Agency was part of Al-Qaeda and the database from the very beginning. Now, if 9/11 was an inside job, then the current myth must be a lie, that prisoners were being tortured to get more information. If we want to get to the bottom of the torture issue, we need to find out how many of the 100 or more detainees that died in custody ever worked for the United States intelligence community. I agree with Cheney that the Senate report on torture is a pile of garbage, but only because the Senate refuses to ask the right questions about who was tortured and why. This same principle holds true for the issue of surveillance, and the media and Congress have refused to look at the issue of surveillance as it relates to alternative internet journalists who seek historical truth. Edward Snowden stating that the NSA goes as far as to monitor every keystroke of certain journalists. There's more than enough documented evidence that many people associated with alternative media and 9/11 truth were attacked or gang stalked. But if we really want to understand this issue of torture, we need to, as a Christmas present to our nation, talk more about some simple 9/11 truths. On August 31st, 2004, 2 months before the presidential election between George Bush and John Kerry, Michael C. Rupert gave an historic address at the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco. More than a decade later, the writing from this address is still on the wall. Rupert stating, "This is no time to be shy. This is not a time when men and women of good conscience can afford to be politically correct or be guided by anything except a willingness to discard every cherished belief or opinion which stands in the way of an accurate and fearless appraisal of the world around us. The events in the 5 years following the attacks of September 11th will determine the course of human history for the next 500 years or more. September 11th, both here in the United States and around the world. I am not alone in believing that the attacks of September 11th were facilitated, orchestrated, and executed by the United States government. The 9/11 attacks were the result of deliberate planning and orchestrated efforts by identifiable leaders within the U.S. government and the energy and financial sectors to see a Pearl Harbor-like attack which would provide the American empire with a pretext for war, invasion, and sequential confiscation of oil and natural gas reserves, or the key transportation routes through which they pass. 9/11 was premeditated murder. In my book, Crossing the Rubicon, The Decline of the American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil, I will name Richard Cheney as the prime suspect in the mass murder of 9/11 and will establish that not only was he a planner in the attacks, but also on that day of the attacks, he was running a completely separate command, control, and communication system, which was superseding any orders issued by the NMCC or the White House Situation Room. To accomplish that end, he relied on redundant and superior communication systems maintained by the United States Secret Service in or near the Presidential Operations Center. Rupert goes on to say, I will establish conclusively that in May of 2001, by presidential order, Richard Cheney was put in direct command and control of all war games and field exercise training and scheduling through several agencies, especially FEMA. This also extended to all of the conflicting and overlapping NORAD drills on that day. So for myself, I can't breathe when the corporate media uses former Vice President Dick Cheney as a credible witness. You can throw 9/11 conspiracy theorists under the bus, but the documented events of 9/11 in Michael Rupert's book are well detailed and speak to the truth. It is time for a real 9/11 investigation if we really want to understand the surveillance society and the torture report. Another key piece of evidence in the 9/11 case was that on September 10th, 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld held a news conference to inform the American public that some $1.5 trillion in Pentagon spending could not be accounted for during an audit of the books. Now, this was a huge sum of money, and estimates now are that there may be between $2.5 and $3 trillion that there is no audit trail available for. But the Navy had begun an investigation into these missing funds, and one day after the announcement, the terror attack on the Pentagon would kill many of the servicemen who were working on this investigation to find these missing funds. In her more than 2-hour narrative on the Pentagon tragedy, Barbara Honecker, a former Treasury Department official from the Reagan administration, details the anomalies of our current Pentagon narrative on 9/11. One fact for sure, an explosion occurred inside the Pentagon 7 minutes before the events that brought down the exterior part of the structure.